Hi, it's Pete the Bumbling Modeler back again. The last video, the series videos about the Austin Tilly seemed to go on for a long time. I'd never played with YouTube before, and it was just, if you stuck with them, thanks. They did seem to ramble on forever. But the Tilly's finished. I'm happy with the results. So that's on a shelf somewhere, never to be seen again. Oh, sorry. So I thought I'd do something different this time and see what it costs to start up the hobby of scale modelling, really. So I'm 59 now, I suppose, and I followed a trajectory that many of you have followed and some of you are about to follow. Is that you, in your sort of very early teens, you're prolific, you make loads of things, and you suddenly stop. Then life starts doing different things, and then you get jobs, you get mortgages, you've got rent to pay, etc., etc. And all of a sudden, you haven't touched a model kit for years. Then something happens that resparks the interest. In my case, it was boredom of sitting there watching telly night in, night out. When the kids were young, we weren't going out as much. Friends had settled down, so your social life changes. And I stumbled across a book in a car boot sale from, I think it's Thomas Verlinden. It's someone Verlinden anyway, and he was a prolific, I think, Belgian modeler back in the 80s, and the book was how he made Sherman tanks. And I sort of got an interest back again and then leapt into it. I was probably late 20s at this point. And then the hobby sort of ramped up ever since. But if you haven't touched a kit for years, as I hadn't at the time, how much does it cost to get back in the hobby as of 2025 when I'm recording this? So I've been out, started from scratch as though I've got nothing, and bought everything I think I'll need to make a model kit. So what I shall do is clear the bench of this, then we'll go through what I've bought and why, and then the next video we'll start putting it together and see how we do it. So give us a second to clear the bench and I'll be with you. Okay, so it doesn't matter which bit to start with, so I'll start with tools. So I was aware of this company, it's Man's Model Moments, not through any knowledge of them. The guy who runs it seems to have a YouTube channel, and he appears to be a scale modeler himself who owns a shop. So I thought, if you're going to buy a starter tool set, you're probably better off buying a set of someone who knows how to put a model together than a generic thing you get off Amazon. So that's the only reason I chose that particular store. I don't know anything about the bloke other than he's got a YouTube channel, and I don't know anything about his shop other than it's somewhere in Devon, I think, or the southwest of the United Kingdom. So yeah, we bought tools from him. £12 for a starter tool set, and I think it was £5 postage and packing. But when I've added everything up, I've rounded it to 18 quid. So it's an £18 tool set in reality, unless you can get to his store direct. Other model shops may sell the same. You can buy the same sort of thing on Amazon. I just wanted to stick with the model shop and a guy who knows what he's doing. So let's see what we get in this. Polishing cloth, fair enough. We get a nice pair of sprue cutters. These are very similar to the ones I had when I started out. And you can't see it, but if I hold them to the light, you can't see any gaps where the two blades join, so they meet nicely, so they should give a nice clean cut. We'll find out soon. And they feel okay in your hand, reasonable quality. We've got an X-Acto type craft knife. I don't normally use these, but I'll stick with this one because it came with it, where little collet so you can slide your blading out. Now, what is good about these, and I'll explain why at a later stage of this build, is if you close this up, the collet goes down to nothing, so you could use this as a pin vise for smaller drills or for other uses later on, which I'll talk about later on. I'll just go through what we've got at the moment and then we'll use it. Then at the end of the video, we'll talk about variances. So we've got that. Spare blades for it. I've already counted those. There's 5 spare blades in there. So that'll last you... I tend to change the blade per model. So that's probably a year's worth of blades, realistically, at the speed I build things. 2 pairs of tweezers, one straight pointed. And again, if you look at them, the points meet. They don't splay out the ends. So you can pick up some quite delicate things with it. They're not cheap by any means. They're not the most expensive ones you'll get, but they're certainly not cheap. And they've got a good spring to them. They don't feel... If you get these really cheap ones, if you do that, they just bend. But these are made out of a decent steel, so they're nice. Sanding stick with a sort of medium and a coarse grit on it, which, again, all this we'll use when we're using it. Nice little needle file, a little bit coarser than what I'd normally use, but let's see how we get on with that. And a sanding sponge, and it's got 3 different grits on it. And these are quite squidgy, so they conform to the shape. So if you're doing something round, like the wheels, the Brengun carry do it, we use that to put the finish polish on. We won't put flat spots on the tyres, so that's okay. So that's what we've got. I'm not going to say I'm going to do a review on this because, firstly, I'm just a bloke who staggers around and makes things. I'm not a particularly good or competent modeler, so who am I to review other people's equipment? But the other reason I wouldn't actually say this is going to be a review of it is this is an example of it, really. They're the tweezers I use every day. A bit of a clean. They're branded, the Tamiya tweezers, and they're really good, really comfy. When we get to the end of the build, I'll explain why I've swapped out some things from here, or why I wouldn't use them, and I'd eventually swap them out. But these tweezers alone were more than this whole toolkit. So if I was to do a review on this, in the back of my mind, I'd be comparing them to a £15 pair of tweezers. And I don't think that's fair on the manufacturers of the tools, the guy who puts the tools together, anything like that. So because I've got a more expensive palette of tools to use, I don't think it's fair of me to do any sort of review, because subconsciously I'd always be referring back to what I use, which isn't a fair comparison at the price point we've got. Okay, so that's the initial bunch of tools we've bought. On seeing those, I became aware there's no paintbrushes in that, so local art shop, I bought some watercolour brushes. It's a 4-pack of brushes. Dale Rowney are, as far as I know, a reasonable make, so these will last you a long time. We're probably only ever going to use this flat one and this little pointy detail one, but that was £4 for that set, which I think is quite reasonable. Pound a brush, and again, if you look after them, they'll last you a long time. I've had some of these kicking around for 3 or 4 years without any damage to them. I am a bit rough on brushes, so others don't last long, but that's down to me rather than them. So that's our tooling sorted out. Apart from, you'll need some other household items, like cocktail sticks are always handy. I don't know why, but I get through thousands of them. Cotton buds and a bit of white tack. White tack rather than blue tack. I've never had it happen, but I believe blue tack is an oil-based product, and the oil will seep out into your paintwork if you're not careful. And where you use that is you quite often need to paint things and you've got no way of holding them, so you'll stick them onto a coffee stirrer with a little blob of white tack, and then you've got a handle to hold something you want to paint it. Coffee stirrers, I tend to every now and again go to Costa, buy a cup of coffee, and when I go to stir it, grab a big handful of them and slip them into my pocket. It's a bit naughty, but you're using them and you're reusing them, so you're not destroying the planet with anything. So that's our basic tools sorted out that we will use. I'll get the kit and I'll explain the choices there, and then we'll talk about glues and paints. Right, so the kit. There are plenty of starter kits about. Airfix and Rebel in the UK, the more prominent ones, and they give you a basic kit 2 or 3, or probably 3 or 4 little pots of glue, tiny ones. They've probably got about 5 ml in them. A tube of, well, the Airfix give you a tube of old-fashioned styrene glue, which is like the toothpaste tube thing, a tiny one, which is pretty hard to use and pretty unpleasant. So yeah, the Revel one tends to give you a little bottle of Revel. Contact you more of that later on. I didn't go down that road because price-wise, similar-ish. Their starter sets are from about £10 or £12 up to about £18. I just don't. I wouldn't say I don't like them. I don't think they'd be a very satisfying build unless you were back in the groove and you had a bit more in the way of tools and equipment and glues and fillers and clamps and that sort of thing. They tend to be the older kits, less detailed kits, and they don't fit quite as well. I've gone down the road of Tamiya. The prices, the older Tamiya armor models particularly, you can pick them up. I think the Jeep is the cheapest one. It starts about 12 quid. And you can get up to a Chieftain tank, which is still only about 20. And between 12 and 20, you've got quite a lot of choice in the armor modeling thing. They are older kits, but unlike an older Airfix or Revel kit, they were a good quality kit right from the word go. So they've got a lot of detail in them. They've got a reasonable parts count. So you're going to get a lot of build time to get more for your money. If you're doing it as a hobby to fill in time, if it builds quickly, it's then becomes a more expensive hobby because you're forever going down to the shops. So I was actually initially looking for the Jeep, but I couldn't find it anywhere because I don't normally like building things with guns on them, and this has got a Brengun sticking out the front. But I'll live with that. It's not the end of the world, and it's not a political thing. It's not something I'm prepared to discuss. I just don't do it at this moment in my life. So we've decided on the early Tamiya kit because we know it'll go together well. All Tamiya kits do. That's just the law, really. I went for an armor model because it's a matte paint finish. We're going to brush paint, and that could be interesting because I've been spraying models with an airbrush for 20 years now. Probably longer than that. I'm not used to brush painting, so this could be a disaster anyway. But irrespective of that, if you're trying to do a gloss finish brush painting, it takes quite a lot of practice. So we've gone for a nice matte model, so we've got a chance of doing our brush lines all over it. We've gone for something that's a single colour because we want to cut down on cost a little bit. If you're just starting out in a hobby, you might not have that much money lying around, so the less colours you get, £2.50 per pot of paint. If you've got 10 different colours on your model, you're talking £25, which is £10 more than the model was to start with. So you have to be a bit careful with that. And it should build relatively quickly, so you're not watching me mess about for hours on video. So that was my reasoning behind that. When I started back in the hobby, I used to be very seasonal. So in the summer, I used to build cars and motorbikes because I could take them outside and spray the gloss coat with a spray can without fuming the house out. In the winter, I tended to build armour and planes because it's a matte finish and you can brush paint it easier. So you think of your environment. If you've got a garage you can work in the winter, then it doesn't really matter if you're using an aerosol can. You can build glossy things all year round. We're just doing it this way because it suits what I'm doing at the moment in a relatively small shed. So that's the model. More of that a bit later on. Let's talk about glues and paints. Right. So back to the bits we need. So when I bought the kit from a generic hobby store rather than going to a model shop, partly because I happened to be passing one at the time. And certainly if you're just starting out back into the hobby, it might be a bit daunting going into a specialist model shop. It shouldn't be, because I've never met one where the owners weren't really friendly and helpful, but I know it can be a bit over the top. So I wanted to get something that anyone could pick up anywhere. So we've gone for that kit. Same with the paints, really. I've gone for Tamiya paints because they're readily available in the UK from a variety of sources. So you're not stuck going in some really sort of specialist shop to get what we need. Within that, I've picked the bare minimum of colours I think we'll need to get a reasonable model. When you are in a generic hobby store, these tend to be sealed up so you can't get into the box. What I would say is have your phone with you. There's a website called ScaleMates. If you look on that, you can download the instructions of most kits that are commercially available. So you can have a quick through the instructions and see what paints you're likely to need for the model. So, which I did when I was in the store actually. So we've come up with a dark green, that's as specified, XF61 dark green. The kit says matte black. I've gone for XF85 rubber black because matte black looks a bit too stark and artificial. So this is mainly going to be for the rub around the road wheels and a few other bits and pieces. So that will be a nicer colour to play with. And I've gone for a dark yellow colour, XF60 in this case. It didn't matter what it was. I wanted a yellowy buff colour so I could lighten the dark green. So if I wanted to paint things like the seat pads here, instead of buying the brown colour they suggest, I can just lighten that green till I get a fawn colour so it stands out, but without actually investing in any more paint. And I can also lighten this tone down for dry brushing. I'm not sure how successfully we can dry brush with Tamiya's, but we're going to give it a go. So it's that sort of, that's your main colour, that's to give it tone, let's do the other bits. And I bought a little pot of acrylic thinner, partly to thin this, but also I use this as a decal fix. So when you put the decals on, if they don't conform, if you paint that over the top, it'll just soften them and melt them into the surface of your model. So that's why we've gone for that. So what does this represent? £2.50 each. So we're talking another £10 there, which is 3/4 of the price of the kit. Now, when you're keen and enthusiastic and you want to build something, don't fall into the trap of looking too closely at the instructions, because if you look at the instruction sheet as it gives you, there's 17 different paints there, but 2 of them for a slightly different kit. So 16 different colours. 16 times £2.50 comes to a lot. So if you were to buy everything you need to make it as per specified by Tamiya, then you're going to be quite an expensive hobby. And if you look at some of the things, this X11 aluminium chrome, I've had a look, and the only thing that's for is the reflective face, that mirror there. So you're going to spend £2.50 to put a tiny blob of paint on a mirror, whereas I'm quite happy to not have paint on it at that price. So use it as a guide, but don't think you need to buy everything on there to make a suitable model. And hopefully by the time I finish this, you realise you can make a model with that fraction of the price. Okay, so don't get too caught up in colour call outs. As long as it looks about right, it looks about right. In saying that, I was in the shop the other day because my car was being serviced and it was just across the road and was killing time. And I'm going to ditch these 2 paints. I'll use them again because I use Tamiya all the time. There was some Humbrol 2nd generation acrylics for £2.80 a pot. So they're slightly dearer than these, but these have got 10mm in, these have got 14mm, so price per mil is probably very much the same. Now, I've done that because Tamiya acrylics, although they spray really nicely, are notoriously difficult to brush paint. And as we're going to be brush painting, I thought I'll give these a try and see how they end up. They might be rubbish, they might not, I don't know. I've never used them before. And part of the problem might be me because I've never brush painted for years, but we'll see how we go. I won't generic colours really. I wasn't too fussed. This is actually a bronze green, but if you look against the Tamiya one. It's slightly lighter, and I always thought this was a bit dark for a Brengun carrier anyway, so that's all right. And again, I bought a sandy yellow colour just to shift the colour phase on that, so that's all colour tone. So that's what we're going to use to paint it. And glues. So we'll be using this Tamiya Extra Thin. It's a liquid poly. It's very watery, as you can see when it wobbles around there, and it's kind of a modeller's standard glue. That pot cost me £5, but it will last and last and last. I can't remember the last time I bought one. So when we get to the end of the model, I'll show you how much we use, and you'd be surprised how little it is. So although it's a capital outlay, yeah, but it'll last you for a while. I'm using this because we're using an armor model, and it's just a case of touch it on a joint and it'll whittle down and glue panels together. There is a Humbrol do a version of this, which is quite commonly available in the UK, but why I like the Tamiya one as well is it comes with this really fine brush, so you can just touch out where it needs to go and the glue will wick in and glue things together. The Humbrol one, I think from memory, either comes with a fatter brush or no brush, so you're using a paintbrush to apply it, so it's another sort of expense. If we've been doing a ship or an aircraft, I would have bought this contact here. It comes the little applicating nozzle, but the difference is, and I can show you on my hand, shouldn't but will. If you put a drop on that, you'll see that stays there and doesn't flash off. And it's more of a resin glue than a solvent. The Tamiya is a solvent, so I put a bit of Tamiya on my hand. You'll see that flashes off straight away, just disappears, and going, gone. It's all dissolved. So this is good if you're gluing something together quickly. If you're doing something like the two halves of a fuselage on a plane, you can either paint this around the seam and it's flashed off on half it before you've clamped it together, or you can clamp it together as you're meant to and just touch this on the join and it'll wick in and just glue that the seam together. But it's only a surface bond, so if you have to sand down to get rid of a join line or a seam, you can sand that through very quickly. Then the seam opens up again, then you put in more of that and it gets a bit pain in the bummy. Whereas this contact here, you can see it's still liquid now. I'll just get it off actually. So if you go around, you're doing a long seam, you go around that and it stays wet. You clamp the two halves together, you get a bit of ooze coming out of it. So you let that go hard, then you can sand it back and you get a joint-free seam. They're about the same price. That's about a £5, that's about a £5. It's horses for courses. If you're going to prefer that one, yep. If you're going to prefer that one, yep. I use both pretty much all of the time. I probably use this one 70% of the time and the contacts are about 30% of the time. But this is another reason I don't think starter sets are particularly good value for money. With that, yes, we've spent a lump of cash, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if we're only using this rubber black for doing tyres, that'll last you dozens and dozens of models, and it lasts in the jar. It doesn't tend to go off, keeps on working. As long as you keep the jar clean and then have a paint build up around the top, that'll last you a while. We'll say this one, it's the same as that. You're going to get at least 3 models out of that, no trouble at all. You're using this for just toning things down, you're going to get a lot of models out of it. So although we spent that extra bit for this kit, whereas we would have got a little jar of paints with the starter set, we would have had an inferior kit, and every time we bought that kit we'd be paying for paints again. Whereas this one, I'll build that, then the next one I build will probably be a Jeep or a Sherman or something. This is in theory, I won't be doing that anyway. So the next time I don't have to buy these 2 paints. I've already got those, so I can concentrate on buying another pot of paint. It specifies in their call out. It'd be the next most prominent paint you use, and then you're gradually building up a rack of paint you can use on multiple models, so your model gets cheaper as time goes by. Again, you bought glue rather than getting that horrible little tube of glue, so yeah, that'll last you years, depending on how much you build. Then the next time you buy a kit, if you think you might need this, you've got buy one of these and you've got 2 different glues on the go. So you're gradually building up a stock of consumables, so every model you build becomes consequently cheaper, if that makes sense. So by not buying a starter set, it's going to be a bit more expensive to start with. But if you're going to stick with a hobby, even if you only build 1 or 2 models a year, the stuff isn't going to go away and it's always going to be there. So it's probably quite a good way of doing it. But we're dodging the bullet there. What does it cost to start up as a scale modeler? Well, the grand total, if we discount these two, which I'm not going to use, or not on this, I'll use them on other models when I'm spraying, but for all we've got here, hopefully everything's in shot. We're talking a grand total of £52.60p, and this is August 2025. And yeah, okay, I know not everyone's got that sort of money to spend, and it is a lot of cash, and there are cheaper ways of doing it. I've spent the money in a way that I think we'll get a reasonable model out of it. We'll see at the end of it. Part of it will be down to my ability, which is sketchy, but we'll see how we end up. We won't be able to get anything as good as the box art. For example, these little streaks down here, we won't be able to replicate those with the equipment we've got. The mud round here we'll have an attempt at, but it'll be a bit difficult. But once you've built this, there's nothing to stop you putting it to one side. And then when you want to try more advanced techniques, you've got a model to practice on, so it saves you damaging a more expensive kit or one where you invested a bit more time into it. This is then your test mule for different techniques and ways of doing things. So yeah, £52, lot of money, but out of that, it's probably 20 quid for that model if you're going to use everything you bought on subsequent kits. So I don't know if there's a rule of thumb, but it looks like about a third extra per kit price to keep going forward. So yeah, and it's one of those things, people are always asking what you want for your birthday or what you want for Christmas. You can never think, if you know you need about 50 quid to get cracking, then you've got a sort of target to work towards. So quite enough waffle there. I shall shut this down in a minute and we'll start looking at the kit and explaining how we're going to put things together. The end of this, I'll end up with a finished model on the bench, and then I'll get the tools I use regularly now and show you. I won't compare them to these because I say that won't be fair, but I'll show you why I've made the choices I've made to move away from these standard sort of tools, which, to be honest, is what I started off with. So that might be of interest to some people. So I would imagine there's going to be about 3 parts to this. You'll see this now and the start of the build of this instantly. I'll put them up together when I do it. It won't be detailed. I'll just be highlighting key points and showing you how I do various bits and pieces. But that's the premise of the next 3 or 4 videos. So hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.